They say I have a gift, that I feel deeply, that I'm the one people trust, that I walk into a room and instantly sense what no one says out loud. But gifts, they're only holy when freely held. And this one, I've come to see, has shackles. You see, I didn't choose to be this way. Not really. Empathy wasn't a decision. It was survival. It began long before I knew the word. There was tension in the house, not shouting something worse. The silence that screams. The kind that makes a child watch the corners of a parent's mouth like a weather forecast. The kind that teaches you to breathe shallow, so others can breathe deep. And so I learned not to feel, but to absorb. Not to be, but to be what was needed. Not to ask, but to intuit. The world praised me, so kind, so wise, so good. But no one saw the cost. No one saw the nights I couldn't sleep, wired on sorrow that wasn't mine. No one saw the dreams' vines wrapping my chest, faces melting into mine, serpents nursing at my fingertips. No one saw how I disappeared. Because when you are always the safe place for others' storms, you begin to drown quietly in the name of light. This is the irony of empathy no one speaks of, that it can turn into a hidden covenant. If I carry your pain, maybe I'll finally be enough to stay. And it's that contract, inkless, wordless, but binding that undoes us, because what we call love might really be survival in disguise. If this stirs something in you, a tremble in the chest, a memory rising, a breath that catches, stay. Not everything that glows is holy. Some lights consume their own wick. And in this video, I want to show you how to stop burning. I used to think I was just nice, the kind of person who remembers birthdays, texts back fast, senses when someone's had a hard day before they say a word. But over time, that niceness became something else. A pressure, a contract, a currency. I began to notice it in moments I couldn't explain, feeling guilty when I didn't reply fast enough, feeling anxious when someone else was upset, even if it had nothing to do with me, feeling empty after long conversations that felt like therapy for them. No one asked me to play this role, but no one stopped me either, and somewhere along the way, I stopped knowing where they ended. And I began. This video isn't about blame, it's about the blueprint, the one so many of us carry quietly, unconsciously, especially if we grew up in homes where emotional storms were common and comfort was rare. Carl Jung called it identification with the shadow of the other, when we merge with others' pain so fully that we begin to mistake it for our own. Empathy, in its truest form, is sacred, but empathy without boundaries, that's spiritual erosion. I want to walk with you into that erosion, not to shame it, not to banish it, but to understand it. Because if we can name the hidden cost of always being the good one, we can begin to rewrite the contract. You don't have to bleed to be loved. You don't have to disappear to matter. You don't have to say yes to what hollows you. You just have to stay long enough to remember what it feels like to be you. It starts earlier than we think. Before we ever learn the word empathy, we feel it somewhere in our earliest memories. There's a moment, subtle, quiet, almost forgettable, when we sensed that someone we loved couldn't carry their pain. So we did, not consciously, not heroically, but instinctively. Maybe it was a mother who rarely smiled, her silence louder than any scream. Maybe a father whose anger was a weather pattern we learned to predict. Maybe it was the grief of a sibling, the despair of a grandparent, the chaos of a room that looked fine, but never felt safe. And so, our little nervous systems stretched, like antenna tuning to invisible frequencies. We learned to read the unspoken. We learned to soften our voice, to shrink our needs, to smile when it hurt. We called it kindness. We were praised for being so mature for our age. But really, we were learning to vanish in those moments. A silent contract was formed. If I carry what you cannot, maybe you won't fall apart. If I feel it for you, maybe I'll be safe. If I become your mirror, maybe you'll love me back. And we didn't know the cost, because children don't think in terms of cost. They think in terms of survival. Here's a strange fact. The octopus has neurons in its tentacles, not just its brain. It feels the world directly through its limbs. That's how it survives. Empaths are like that. Except instead of ocean currents, we feel moods, grief, rage, unspoken hunger. It floods us before we can name it. And like the octopus, we adapt fluid, shapeless, ever responsive. But what happens when you adapt so well that you forget your original shape? Jung spoke often of the anima possession, when a person becomes overwhelmed by an unconscious figure, often tied to childhood trauma or unmet needs. I believe many empaths live in this state, not possessed by darkness, but by need, not haunted by ghosts, but by echoes, and dreams begin to speak. Dreams of drowning, dreams of endless hallways, dreams of houses with rooms we're afraid to enter. I once dreamed I was holding a baby that kept crying. No matter what I did, I rocked it, sang to it, fed it. Nothing helped, until I looked down and realized the baby had my eyes. That's when I understood. The one I've been trying to save all these years is me. Oddly enough, this realization didn't come with joy. It came with nausea, because when your identity has been built on saving others, the idea of saving yourself feels selfish, foreign, wrong. But that's the lie. The first clause in the contract: you must abandon yourself to be good. And every time we choose ourselves, every time we say, "No, I can't hold this for you," the contract trembles. I see it now. All those moments I felt like I was being good. I was actually bargaining. I'll carry your pain if you'll let me exist. But existing isn't a transaction, it's a birthright. And the moment we realize that, the silence that once wrote the contract begins to break. We hear our own voice again, shaky, quiet, but there, and in that voice, lives our first true act of empathy. Not toward others, but toward ourselves. It starts earlier than we think. Before we ever learn the word empathy, we feel it, somewhere in our earliest memories. There's a moment subtle, quiet, almost forgettable, when we sensed that someone we loved couldn't carry their pain. So we did, not consciously, not heroically, but instinctively. Maybe it was a mother who rarely smiled, her silence louder than any scream. Maybe a father whose anger was a weather pattern we learned to predict. Maybe it was the grief of a sibling, the despair of a grandparent, the chaos of a room that looked fine, but never felt safe. And so, our little nervous systems stretched, like antennae tuning to invisible frequencies. We learned to read the unspoken. We learned to soften our voice, to shrink our needs, to smile when it hurt. We called it kindness. We were praised for being so mature for our age. But really, we were learning to vanish. In those moments, a silent contract was formed. If I carry what you cannot, maybe you won't fall apart. If I feel it for you, maybe I'll be safe. If I become your mirror, maybe you'll love me back. And we didn't know the cost, because children don't think in terms of cost. They think in terms of survival. Here's a strange fact. The octopus has neurons in its tentacles, not just its brain. It feels the world directly through its limbs. That's how it survives. Empaths are like that. Except instead of ocean currents, we feel moods, grief, rage, unspoken hunger. It floods us before we can name it. And like the octopus, we adapt fluid, shapeless, ever responsive. But what happens when you adapt so well that you forget your original shape? Jung spoke often of the anima possession, when a person becomes overwhelmed by an unconscious figure, often tied to childhood trauma or unmet needs. I believe many empaths live in this state, not possessed by darkness, but by need, not haunted by ghosts, but by echoes, and dreams begin to speak. Dreams of drowning, dreams of endless hallways, dreams of houses with rooms we're afraid to enter. I once dreamed I was holding a baby that kept crying. No matter what I did, I rocked it, sang to it, fed it. Nothing helped until I looked down and realized the baby had my eyes. That's when I understood. The one I've been trying to save all these years is me. Oddly enough, this realization didn't come with joy. It came with nausea, because when your identity has been built on saving others, the idea of saving yourself feels selfish, foreign, wrong. But that's the lie. The first clause in the contract: you must abandon yourself to be good. And every time we choose ourselves, every time we say, "No, I can't hold this for you," the contract trembles. I see it now. All those moments I felt like I was being good, I was actually bargaining. I'll carry your pain if you'll let me exist. But existing isn't a transaction, it's a birthright. And the moment we realize that, the silence that once wrote the contract begins to break. We hear our own voice again, shaky, quiet. But there, and in that voice, lives our first true act of empathy. Not toward others, but toward ourselves. There's something deeper than personal trauma, a weight in the bones, a whisper in the blood. Many of us weren't just taught to serve, we inherited it. We come from long lines of silent women, stoic men, unspoken grief. We descend from survivors not just of war, but of emotional famine, where love was rationed, where joy was suspicious, and where shining too brightly meant drawing danger. Somewhere in that lineage, an oath was made. We will be the soft ones, so the tribe may live. And so the pattern continued. Grandmothers who bore too much, mothers who smiled while breaking, fathers who only knew how to provide, not feel, aunties who never married, uncles who drank instead of crying. This isn't judgment, it's reverence. They survived, and through their sacrifices, we arrived. But empathy, when tangled in ancestral debt, becomes something else, not compassion, obligation, and the contract tightens. Not just "I will carry your pain," but "I will carry generations of it." This is where things get archetypal, Jung said. The unconscious of one person contains the collective unconscious of all mankind, and you feel it. Don't you? That strange heaviness in your chest when you set a boundary and guilt floods in, but the guilt doesn't feel like yours. That sudden grief when you celebrate as if joy has a cost. That dream where you're being judged by people you've never met, and they're all wearing your grandmother's face. Dreams speak the truth we refuse to say aloud. I once had a dream where I stood in a long line of women. Each held a candle, each wore the same expression, weary pride. When it was my turn to hold the flame, I hesitated, and from behind me, a voice whispered, "Don't let it go out. We didn't survive for nothing." It rattled me. Was I breaking the line? Was healing a betrayal? But then a shift. Another woman appeared, younger, radiant. She looked at me and said, "Let the flame change shape." And suddenly, the candle melted, and in its place bloomed a flower. Bright, wild, uncontained. That's when I knew honoring the past doesn't mean repeating its wounds. It means transforming them. Odd fact, in some cultures, grief isn't private. It's wailed, danced. Mourners hire professional keeners to cry the pain aloud so it doesn't rot inside. We, the empaths, have been keening for our bloodlines in silence. But it's time to sing a different song, to say, "I see what you carried. I honor it, but I will not pass it down." That's not betrayal, that's evolution. Because every time we choose rest over performance, joy over guilt, boundaries over burnout, we are not just healing ourselves. We're whispering to our ancestors, "It's safe now. You can exhale." And one day, we will become the ancestors. What story do we want to leave in the bones of those who come next? Not martyrdom, but magic. Not depletion, but dignity. Not the echo of an oath, but the freedom of a voice finally singing its own name. Anger scared me, not just in others, in myself. I thought if I ever let it out, I'd burn the house down. I'd become the thing I feared, I'd lose control, so I kept it buried, pressed between politeness and prayer, labeled it patience, called it understanding. But the truth, it was rage, untouched, unclaimed, lurking like heat behind my eyes. Many empaths carry this same unspoken terror. If I express my anger, I'll become cruel. If I show my power, I'll become him, or her, or them. And so we spiritualize our suppression. We quote peace. We practice forgiveness like a ritual. We smile through the teeth of injustice. But Jung warned us, what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. When we exile our anger, it doesn't die. It shapeshifts into migraines, into resentment, into that quiet sigh when someone crosses a boundary again. Odd fact, the mantis shrimp has the fastest punch in the animal kingdom. Its strike can shatter glass, but it only uses that power when absolutely necessary. It knows its force, and that knowing is peace. Peace is not the absence of anger, it's the integration of it. I once worked with someone who told me, I'm not angry, just sad. But her sadness was acidic. It corroded her joy. She was leaking rage in slow motion. That's what happens when we don't own our fire. Empaths often come from childhoods where anger was dangerous, where love was conditional, where expressing needs brought punishment or shame. So we made a choice. Better to be loved for being quiet than rejected for being real. But here's the thing. Anger, when listened to, is not destruction. It's instruction. It says, this hurts, this matters, this must change. Boundaries are made of that voice. And when I finally began to listen, I didn't erupt. I clarified. I started saying, no, not right now. I can't carry that for you. This doesn't feel respectful. And sure, my voice trembled. My chest tightened. Guilt howled like a ghost in my throat. But I spoke anyway. And something miraculous happened. People adjusted. Some were surprised. Some resisted. Some disappeared. Let them, because that's how the contract breaks. Not in one dramatic act, but in 1,000 small refusals to abandon yourself. Dreams help here too. Many empaths, as they reclaim power, dream of fire, of glowing animals, of red clothing. I once dreamed I wore a crimson coat in a city of grey. Everyone stared. I wanted to hide, but when I looked again, they weren't angry, they were curious. Power, it turns out, doesn't repel, it reveals, and yes, some will leave. But the ones who remain, they'll know the real you. The one who doesn't just soothe others, but stands for herself. The one who doesn't confuse nice with numb. The one who lets her fire burn clean. You're not dangerous, you're divine. Not in spite of your anger, but because you've finally allowed it to speak. Let it burn through the lies. Let it illuminate the rooms where you were told to be small. You're not here to be harmless. You're here to be whole. It's subtle, the way we slip into martyrdom. One day, we're helping someone through a hard time. The next, we're the one everyone calls when things fall apart. But no one notices when we fall too. I didn't mean to become that person. I thought I was just being supportive, until I realized I had become invisible. Not to them, to me. That's the final clause in the contract no one talks about. To matter, you must disappear. It's in the way we say I'm fine with a smile, in the way we let conversations stay one-sided, in the way we swallow truth so others won't choke on discomfort. But that isn't empathy. That's self-erasure, and the transformation begins when we stop being a sponge and become a mirror. A mirror doesn't absorb pain. It reflects it back clearly, compassionately, with edges intact. Jung spoke of the archetype of the wounded healer, the one who heals not by saving, but by embodying wholeness in the face of suffering. That's the new role, to say, I see your pain, and I trust you can face it. I can walk beside you, but I won't carry what isn't mine. My light is not a shelter, it's a signal, and that changes everything. Odd fact, mirrors in ancient times were often made of obsidian volcanic glass. They didn't offer clarity, They revealed essence. The new empath, the sovereign empath, is like that, not polished into perfection, but real, raw, refined by fire. I once had a dream where I wandered through a house I didn't recognize. Room after room, all dim, covered in dust. I opened one door, and there was a mirror, but no reflection, just blackness. At first, I panicked. Had I vanished? But then I touched the mirror's surface, and heat pulsed through my hand. Not absence, potential. The room wasn't haunted. It was waiting. That's what happens when we've spent a lifetime serving others. Our inner rooms gather dust. Our wildness withers. Our gifts go unopened, but they are still there. Behind the locked doors, beneath the praise, beyond the performance. And the moment we say, "I will not abandon myself for your comfort," those rooms begin to breathe again. The empath doesn't stop caring. They start choosing how they care. No longer compulsively, no longer as a way to be loved, but from clarity, from presence, from power. It's not always graceful. Sometimes your voice will shake. Sometimes you'll overcorrect. Sometimes people will get upset. Let them, because every time you draw a line, you offer others permission to find their own. Your life stops being a bleeding ground and becomes a boundary line, a map. You go from martyr to mentor, from sponge to sovereign. You don't vanish in other people's pain anymore. You stand in your own light, not as a savior, not as a saint, but as someone who finally came home to herself. There's a moment it's quiet, barely perceptible, when you realize you're not broken, you're bound. Bound by a script you never wrote, a role you didn't audition for, a story passed down by parents, by culture, by collective wounds. The good one, the selfless one, the light in everyone else's darkness. And what happens when you stop playing that part? You're told it's betrayal, selfishness, blasphemy, but it's not. It's sacred heresy. Because choosing yourself in a system built on self-abandonment will always look like a sin to those who benefit from your silence. I felt it the first time I said no without apologizing. Like a tremor, like I'd broken a holy law. I hadn't. I'd broken a lie. The lie that love equals sacrifice. That being loved means being needed. That your value is measured by your willingness to bleed, Jung said. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. For many empaths, fate is codependency wrapped in spiritual language. We say, "I'm just called to help." But really, we're called to disappear. It's time to call that what it is, a contract of extinction. And the only way to break it is to remember. Remember who you were before the contract, before the vow, before the yes that hollowed you. Here's something strange. As I reclaimed my space, my anger, my desire, I had a recurring dream. I was standing in a chapel, alone. At the altar sat a chalice etched with the words, "Drink, and they shall be healed." I drank, and with every sip, the cup filled with my blood, until my body turned translucent, until I vanished. I'd wake up shaking. At first, I thought I had defiled something sacred. Now I know. I had defied something false, because no God worthy of worship asks you to cease existing to love others. To break the contract is to take the chalice and pour it out. To say, "I'm done bleeding for approval. I'm done burning for affection. I'm done vanishing to be seen." And it doesn't mean you stop caring. It means your care becomes clean. You carry what is yours. You release what is not. You offer presence, not salvation, and something beautiful happens. Your empathy deepens. Your boundaries sharpen. Your light no longer attracts chaos. It reveals character. You stop rescuing. You start reflecting. The people who once fed on your endless giving may leave. Let them. Some were there for the glow, not the gold. Others will stay, and in your sovereignty, they'll remember theirs. Odd fact. When a forest is left alone after a fire, it doesn't grow back the same. It grows back wiser, more resilient. rooted deeper. So will you. This is the sacred heresy. To reclaim your life, to disappoint others before you betray yourself, to choose rest without guilt, to love without leaking. It won't always be easy, but it will be true. And one day, you'll stand in a room full of noise and remain yourself. You'll feel the pull of someone's sorrow and remain yourself. You'll be asked to play the old part and decline with grace. And in that moment, you'll realize you are finally free. So here we are, not at the end, really, but at a beginning disguised as a closing. You've walked with me through old rooms and ancient stories, through forgotten dreams, ancestral echoes, and the soft places in the soul, where light once begged to shine. Maybe you've cried a little. Maybe your jaw clenched at certain truths. Maybe you heard a voice inside whisper, finally, someone sees me. Let that voice stay. Because this journey isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were. Before you were told empathy meant erasure. You were never meant to disappear in service of others. You were never meant to carry pain like currency. You were never meant to be praised for breaking. You were meant to feel, yes, but also to choose what you hold. You were meant to love deeply, but also to love yourself with the same ferocity you pour into others. The soul does not demand self-sacrifice. It invites self-honoring. So here's what I ask of you now. Begin small. Speak a need aloud. Say no without explanation. Let your laughter take up space. Wear color. Rest, even when no one's watching. These aren't rebellions. They're returns. And if guilt rises, let it. If grief comes, welcome it. They're just old contracts dissolving. This isn't a call to selfishness. It's a call to wholeness. Because only when you are whole can your empathy become sacred again. Not performance, not prison, but presence. So thank you for listening with open heart. Thank you for daring to feel deeply and still remain. Thank you for being the kind of soul who says yes, not to everyone, but to yourself. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope today you find a quiet corner to continue that silent conversation with yourself. And don't forget to subscribe. There are many more videos to come about dreams, the shadow, and the hidden corners of the soul waiting for you ahead.